Have you ever been pushed to the edge, where every choice feels impossible and every decision comes with a price? This is the story of how I found myself at a crossroads, forced to make a choice that would change everything. It's raw, it's real, and it's a reminder that sometimes survival comes at a cost. Stay with me, because this is a story you won't forget. I never thought my life would spiral to this point. At 20 years old, I had imagined myself thriving, full of dreams and possibilities. Yet there I was, sitting on the worn-out couch of my tiny studio apartment, staring at a stack of overdue bills spread across the coffee table like a deck of mocking cards. The rent notice sat on top, bold red letters declaring final warning, as if shouting at me to do something, anything. My stomach churned as I glanced at my phone. No new notifications, no responses to the dozens of job applications I'd submitted. My savings had already dried up, and the few dollars left in my bank account wouldn't even cover the cheapest loaf of bread. I was suffocating under the weight of it all. Rent due in 2 days, no income, and nowhere to turn. The city wasn't kind to people like me. It swallowed you whole if you couldn't keep up, and lately I felt like I was being digested by its merciless grip. My landlord, Mr. Callahan, had already left 2 voicemails reminding me of my overdue rent. The second one was less of a reminder and more of a thinly veiled threat. "You're running out of time," he said, his deep voice devoid of sympathy. "If I don't have the money by Friday, you're out. No exceptions." My chest tightened just thinking about it. I couldn't go back to my parents' house. They didn't have much to offer themselves, and the idea of admitting my failure to them made me want to crawl into a hole. I had nowhere else to go, no one to lean on. I was trapped. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. They grew louder, stopping just outside my door. My pulse quickened as a firm knock echoed through the apartment. I knew who it was before I even stood up. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door and opened it, revealing Mr. Callahan. He stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the doorway. His suit was perfectly pressed, and his graying hair was slicked back neatly, giving him an air of authority that was both intimidating and oddly magnetic. "Good evening, Rachel," he said, his voice smooth yet firm. "May I come in?" I hesitated, glancing around the hallway as if someone might rescue me from this conversation. When no one appeared, I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. He entered without waiting for an invitation, his eyes sweeping over the cluttered apartment. I felt a pang of embarrassment at the sight of my unwashed dishes and the laundry basket overflowing in the corner. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I assume you know why I'm here." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes. About the rent. I'm working on it. I just need a little more time." "Time isn't something I can afford to give," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "This isn't a charity, Rachel. I have other tenants waiting for a place like this, tenants who can pay on time." "I understand," I said quickly, my voice trembling, "but I promise I'll have it soon. I just need a few more days." He studied me for a moment, his piercing gaze making me feel exposed. "A few days won't make a difference if you don't have the money." His words hit me like a slap, and I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I looked away, ashamed of how powerless I felt. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Callahan's expression softened slightly, though his demeanor remained controlled. "Desperation is a dangerous thing," he said, almost as if to himself. Then he stepped closer, his presence looming over me. "But it also opens doors." I frowned, confused by his words. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head, his gaze never leaving mine. "I'm saying that there's more than one way to settle a debt." The air seemed to shift, growing heavy with unspoken tension. My heart raced as his words sank in, their implication clear. My mouth went dry, and I struggled to find a response. I don't think I understand," I said, though I knew exactly what he meant. "You're a smart girl, Rachel," he said, his voice low and deliberate. I think you understand perfectly. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as I stood frozen under his gaze. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, but the reality of my situation weighed me down like an anchor. I was cornered, and he knew it. I can't, I started, but he cut me off. You can, he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. And you will, if you want to stay here. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. This kind of thing only happened in stories, not in real life. But as I looked at him standing there, so calm and confident, I realized this was my reality now. I need time to think, I said, my voice shaky. He nodded, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Take all the time you need, Rachel. But remember, you're running out of it. With that, he turned and walked to the door, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. The sound of it clicking shut behind him was like a final nail in the coffin. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to reject his proposition, to find another way. But as I stared at the eviction notice on the table, the weight of my desperation pressed down on me. What choice did I have? The next morning, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt invasive, like it was exposing all of my secrets. I avoided the mirror, unable to face my own reflection. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself, I felt a surge of shame so intense that it was almost unbearable. I tried to go about my day as if nothing had happened. I cleaned the apartment, ran errands, and even went to work, but everything felt different. I felt different. It was like I was walking around with a sign on my forehead that said, "Look at me. I sold my body to pay my rent." My coworkers didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, but I felt like I was being watched, judged. Every time someone looked at me, I wondered if they could tell, if they knew. It was exhausting, and by the time my shift ended, I was ready to collapse. When I got home, I found myself staring at my phone, my finger hovering over Mr. Callahan's number. I hated myself for even considering it, but the truth was, I didn't know what else to do. The money he had given me wouldn't last forever, and the thought of going through this cycle again made me feel like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I thought about texting him, about asking for help, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I threw my phone onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. The weight of my choices pressed down on me like a physical burden. I didn't know how I was going to move forward, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I just didn't know what or how. All I knew was that I was sinking, and I didn't know if I had the strength to pull myself back up.